October 27, 1962, the most dangerous day in human history. Soviet submarine B-59, somewhere in the Caribbean Sea. Depth, 300 feet. Temperature, inside 37 degrees Celsius. The air conditioning failed hours ago. Men are fainting from heat exhaustion and carbon dioxide poisoning. No contact with Moscow for 5 days. No idea what's happening on the surface. Just explosions. Constant explosions. Depth charges rocking the submarine, shaking it violently from side to side. Captain Valentin Savitsky stands in the control room, sweat pouring down his face. He's been awake for 2 days, exhausted, terrified, furious. The Americans are attacking. They must be. Why else would they be dropping bombs? War has started. It has to have started. He makes a decision that will either save his crew or doom the world. He orders the nuclear torpedo armed. The weapon is assembled, loaded into the tube, ready to fire. Power equivalent to the bomb that destroyed Hiroshima. The protocol is clear. 2 signatures needed to launch. Captain Savitsky, political officer Ivan Maslenikov. Both men agree. Launch. Destroy the American ships attacking them. Go out fighting. Don't let the Soviet Navy be shamed. Savitsky reportedly says it plainly. We're going to blast them now. We will die, but we will sink them all. We will not become the shame of the fleet. But there's a problem. A bureaucratic anomaly that will save 3 billion lives. On this particular submarine, there's a 3rd officer, Vasili Arkhipov, Brigade Chief of Staff, second in command of B-59. His signature is also required, and Vasili Arkhipov says no. An argument erupts, 2 against 1. Launch the torpedo, start the war, die with honor. Arkhipov refuses. He's calm, rational, somehow maintaining clarity in hell. The Americans aren't attacking, he insists. They're signaling, trying to force us to surface. If we fire that torpedo, we start World War III, and we'll all die for nothing. The argument lasts for who knows how long, minutes that feel like hours, every depth charge bringing them closer to death, or closer to launching a nuclear weapon. Finally, Savitsky breaks. Fine, we surface, we surrender. But if I'm wrong, this is on you, Arkhipov. The submarine rises. 11 American destroyers and an aircraft carrier surround them, but they don't fire, they don't board. They just watch as the Soviet submarine surfaces, flies its flag, and demands the depth charging stop. The Americans have no idea how close they came. No idea there's a nuclear weapon on board. No idea that 2 out of 3 Soviet officers voted to use it. They won't know for 40 years. Vasili Arkhipov dies in 1998. Kidney cancer, likely caused by radiation exposure from a previous submarine disaster. He's 72 years old. His obituary in Russian papers is small. Vice Admiral, retired, naval officer. No mention of October 27, 1962. No mention of the day he saved the world, because almost nobody knows. The story doesn't emerge until 2002, 4 years after his death. When it does, historians universally agree. This was the closest humanity has ever come to nuclear annihilation, and one man stopped it with a single word. No. Let's rewind. October 1st, 1962. 4 Soviet Foxtrot-class diesel submarines depart from Kola Bay in northern Russia. Destination, Cuba. Mission, establish a Soviet naval base near Havana. Provide nuclear deterrent against American invasion. The submarines are state-of-the-art, built in Leningrad between 1959 and 1961. Each carries 22 torpedoes. One of those torpedoes on each submarine is special, nuclear-tipped, yield roughly equivalent to Hiroshima. 15 kilotons. The submarines are B-4, B-36, B-130, and B-59. Each has a captain, each has orders. In the absence of communication with Moscow, 2 signatures authorized nuclear launch. Captain and political officer. That's it. Two men can start a nuclear war if they believe it's necessary. The submarines are diesel-electric, not nuclear-powered. This matters. It means they need to surface regularly to recharge batteries and refresh air. Staying submerged for days at a time pushes the crew and equipment to breaking point. October 22nd, President John F. Kennedy addresses the nation. The CIA has photographic evidence. Soviet nuclear missiles are being installed in Cuba. Medium and intermediate-range ballistic missiles, capable of hitting most American cities, Washington, New York, Chicago, all within range. Kennedy announces a naval blockade. He calls it a quarantine to avoid the word blockade, which is technically an act of war. Any Soviet ship carrying offensive military equipment will be stopped, searched, turned back. The 4 submarines are already en route, traveling at 10 knots, pushing their engines hard, too fast for safety. Malfunctions start occurring. Equipment breaks. The submarines are detected by American anti-submarine warfare forces. The hunt begins. 11 destroyers and the aircraft carrier USS Randolph deployed to find and track the Soviet subs. Their orders: use practice depth charges to force the submarines to surface for identification. Practice depth charges, non-lethal, just loud, meant to signal, "We know you're there, come up." But nobody told the Soviets that. Nobody told the submarine crews. When depth charges start exploding near B-59, the crew assumes they're under attack, real attack, the kind that kills you. B-59 is trying to avoid detection, staying deep, days without surfacing. The conditions deteriorate rapidly. The air conditioning fails. Temperature inside climbs to 37 degrees Celsius, over 98 Fahrenheit, in confined spaces with over 50 men. The humidity is unbearable. Men are stripped to underwear, still sweating through their clothes, fainting from heat exhaustion, carbon dioxide levels rising. Breathing becomes difficult. No communication with Moscow. They're too deep to receive radio signals. The last orders they had were from before the blockade. Before Kennedy's speech, they have no idea what's happening on the surface. Did war break out? Did Cuba get invaded? Did the missiles launch? They know nothing. Just that American ships are hunting them. And now, explosions. The depth charges aren't strong enough to sink the submarine. But the crew doesn't know that. Each explosion rocks B-59 violently. Equipment shakes. Men are thrown against bulkheads. The sound is deafening. The psychological impact devastating. They're being attacked, hunted, killed. It's only a matter of time before a charge hits them directly and cracks the hull. Captain Valentin Savitsky is an experienced officer, combat veteran, but he's been awake for 2 days. The heat is extreme, the situation impossible. He's responsible for 70 crew members, and he believes they're under attack by American forces. War must have started. Why else would they be depth charging? His thinking is clear. If war started, we fight back. If we're going to die, we take the enemy with us. We don't surrender. We don't shame the Soviet Navy. He orders the nuclear torpedo assembled. It takes time. The weapon must be armed, warhead activated, loaded into Tube 1, prepared for firing. The torpedo officer carries out the orders. Men who moments ago were fainting from heat now focus on preparing a weapon that will start World War III. Political officer Ivan Maslenikov agrees with Savitsky. Launch. This is war. This is what we do. 2 signatures. 2 votes, yes. The torpedo is ready. Target: USS Randolph, or one of the destroyers. Doesn't matter which. Once that 15-kiloton warhead detonates, the response is certain. America will assume a nuclear attack, will respond with nuclear weapons. The Soviet Union will respond to that. Escalation is inevitable, automatic, unstoppable. Vasili Arkhipov is 36 years old on October 27, 1962. Born January 30th, 1926, in a small village near Moscow, joined the Soviet Navy during World War II, rose through the ranks. By 1962, he's Brigade Chief of Staff for the 69th Submarine Brigade. This is why he's on B-59, not just second in command of the submarine, but commander of the entire flotilla, B-4, B-36, B-130, B-59. All under his authority, this bureaucratic detail saves the world, because Arkhipov being Chief of Staff means 3 signatures are required to launch B-59's nuclear torpedo, not 2. 3. Captain Savitsky, Political Officer Maslenikov, and Brigade Chief Arkhipov. All 3 must agree, and Arkhipov disagrees. He's calm in chaos. While Savitsky is shouting about blasting the Americans, while Maslenikov is ready for martyrdom, Arkhipov stays rational. He's been here before, literally. 1 year earlier, July 4th, 1961, Arkhipov was deputy commander of submarine K-19, the first Soviet nuclear ballistic missile submarine. During exercises in the North Atlantic, K-19's nuclear reactor coolant system suffered a catastrophic leak. The submarine was hours from meltdown, a nuclear explosion that would kill everyone aboard and possibly trigger war with America. Arkhipov and 7 other engineers jury-rigged a cooling system, went into the reactor compartment, exposed themselves to lethal radiation, stabilized the reactor, saved the submarine. All 7 engineers and their divisional officer died within a month from acute radiation syndrome. Within 2 years, another 15 crew members dead from radiation exposure. Arkhipov absorbed massive radiation doses but survived. For now. The cancer that will kill him in 1998 starts that day, but K-19 taught him something crucial. Panic kills. Rash decisions kill. In crisis, you stay calm. You think. You don't assume war started. You verify. And right now, on B-59, there's no verification, just assumption. Savitsky assumes war started. Maslenikov assumes war started. Arkhipov doesn't assume. He analyzes. The depth charges are patterned depth charges, used for signaling, not sinking. If Americans wanted B-59 destroyed, they'd use real weapons, anti-submarine torpedoes, larger depth charges. The attacks would be more aggressive, more precise. What's happening matches American procedure for forcing submarines to surface, not for destroying them. Arkhipov knows this. He's studied American tactics. He recognizes the pattern. He argues with Savitsky, calm but firm. We don't know war started. We're cut off from Moscow. If we fire that torpedo, we might be starting the war ourselves. We'll kill Americans. They'll respond with nuclear weapons. The Soviet Union will respond to that. We'll cause the deaths of millions, maybe hundreds of millions. For what? Because we assumed war started when we don't actually know? Savitsky is furious. You want us to surrender? Disgrace the Soviet Navy? Let the Americans capture us without fighting back? Arkhipov shakes his head. I want us to surface. Find out what's actually happening. Get orders from Moscow. If war started, Moscow will tell us. If it didn't, we'll have prevented a catastrophe. The argument continues. How long? The records don't say. Minutes, maybe longer. 2 men voting yes, 1 voting no. The torpedo is loaded, ready, 1 signature away from launch. The entire crew knows what's being debated. Some side with Savitsky, some with Arkhipov, but the decision isn't theirs. It's between 3 officers in the command room, arguing while depth charges explode around them. Finally, Savitsky relents. Maybe he sees Archipov's logic. Maybe he's too exhausted to keep fighting. Maybe he realizes Arkhipov, as brigade chief, technically outranks him. Fine, we surface. But you're taking responsibility for this, Arkhipov. If the Americans sink us on the surface, that's on you. The order is given. Emergency blow tanks, rise to periscope depth, then surface. The submarine breaks through the Caribbean Sea into sunlight. 11 American destroyers and an aircraft carrier surround them. B-59 is battered, crew gaunt, exhausted, but alive. They fly the Soviet flag, demand the depth charging stop. The Americans comply. No boarding, no search, just identification. The submarine is allowed to leave. What the Americans don't know is miraculous. They don't know B-59 carries a nuclear torpedo. Don't know 2 officers voted to launch it. Don't know they came within 1 vote of triggering nuclear war. They think they successfully forced a Soviet submarine to surface. Routine anti-submarine operation. Nothing unusual. B-59 limps away. The crew celebrates survival. Arkhipov says nothing, just relief that his decision was correct. That war didn't start. That millions of people will live who would have died if he'd said yes instead of no. Let's understand what would have happened if Arkhipov voted yes. If that 15-kiloton nuclear torpedo launched at USS Randolph or one of the destroyers. The explosion destroys the target ship instantly, kills everyone aboard, possibly damages other nearby vessels. The radiation signature is unmistakable. This was a nuclear weapon. President Kennedy receives word. Soviet submarine launched nuclear weapon at American ships, killed hundreds of sailors, used a nuclear weapon against U.S. forces. This is war, not Cuban Missile Crisis negotiation. Actual war, nuclear war. Kennedy has options. All bad. He can respond conventionally, sink every Soviet submarine in the area, bomb Soviet facilities in Cuba. But that's not how nuclear doctrines work. Nuclear attack requires nuclear response. Otherwise, deterrence collapses. Kennedy orders tactical nuclear strikes on Soviet military targets, maybe just in Cuba, maybe Soviet submarines. He's trying to keep it limited, proportional. But how do you keep nuclear war limited? Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev receives word. America nuked Soviet forces. Our submarine attacked, yes, but America responded with nuclear weapons. This is the war we feared, the war we tried to avoid. Khrushchev has options. All worse. He can respond conventionally, but nuclear doctrine demands nuclear response. Otherwise, the Soviet Union looks weak, willing to absorb nuclear attack without fighting back. Khrushchev orders strikes on American targets, maybe just military, maybe NATO bases in Europe. He's trying to keep it limited too, but there's no limited nuclear war, only nuclear war. America responds to Soviet strikes with more strikes. Soviet Union responds to those, back and forth. Escalation ladder climbed rung by rung, strategic weapons deployed, ICBMs launched, bombers in the air, submarines firing, cities burning. How many die in the first 24 hours? Conservative estimates say 50 million. First week? 200 million. First year, factoring in radiation, nuclear winter, starvation, disease, over 1 billion, maybe 2 billion, maybe more. Civilization doesn't end completely. Humans survive. But the world of October 1962 is gone forever, replaced by radioactive ruins and struggling survivors. All because one Soviet submarine captain, exhausted and terrified in a metal tube deep underwater, thought war started and decided to fight back. All prevented because one other Soviet officer said no. One vote. One man. Between continuation and catastrophe. The Cuban Missile Crisis ends peacefully. October 28th, Kennedy and Khrushchev reach agreement. Soviet missiles out of Cuba, American missiles out of Turkey. Both sides de-escalate. The world steps back from the brink. Historians will later call it a triumph of diplomacy. Rational leadership preventing nuclear war. They have no idea how close they came. No idea that rational leadership almost didn't matter. That a decision made underwater by 3 men nobody's heard of nearly rendered diplomacy irrelevant. The submarine fleet returns to the Soviet Union. B-59 crew debriefed. What happened out there? Why did you surface? Savitsky reports, depth charges forced us up, air conditioning failed, conditions unbearable, decision made to surface rather than risk crew. He doesn't mention the nuclear torpedo, doesn't mention the vote, doesn't mention how close they came. Why the secrecy? Several reasons. First, Soviet leadership is furious they surfaced at all. You were detected, identified, photographed. You revealed Soviet presence when you could have stayed hidden. Surfacing is failure. Second, admitting they almost launched nuclear weapons is admitting how close they came to starting war without authorization. Not good for career advancement. Third, the whole situation is embarrassing. 4 submarines sent on secret mission. All 4 detected within weeks. The mission is failure before it begins. So they stay quiet. Savitsky stays quiet. Maslenikov stays quiet. Arkhipov stays quiet. The crew knows, but the crew doesn't talk. The decades pass. Arkhipov continues serving in Soviet Navy, promoted to Rear Admiral, becomes head of Kirov Naval Academy, respected officer, long career, retires mid-1980s. The Soviet Union collapses. The Cold War ends. Arkhipov lives quietly. Nobody asking him about October 27, 1962. Nobody knowing there's anything to ask about. August 19, 1998. Vasili Arkhipov dies. Kidney cancer, traced back to K-19 radiation exposure 37 years earlier. His obituary in Russian newspapers is small. Vice Admiral, retired, survived K-19 disaster, served honorably for 40 years. No mention of Cuban Missile Crisis. No mention of B-59. No mention of saving the world, because nobody knows. The story is still secret, still hidden in Soviet military archives, still unknown to historians. His widow, Olga, knows, Arkhipov told her about the argument, about saying no when Savitsky and Maslenikov said yes, about preventing nuclear launch. But she doesn't speak about it publicly, not yet. Her husband died believing his career was good, but unremarkable. He never knew he'd become famous, never knew historians would call him the man who saved the world. He died thinking the Cuban Missile Crisis was resolved by Kennedy and Khrushchev. That submarine crews were footnotes, that his decision didn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. October 2002, 40th anniversary of Cuban Missile Crisis, conference in Havana, Cuba, American officials, Russian officials, Cuban officials. The first time all 3 nations' representatives meet to discuss what actually happened. The Americans bring declassified documents. The Russians bring declassified documents. Slowly, carefully, the full story emerges. The Russians reveal the submarines. 4 Foxtrot-class boats sent to Cuba. The Americans are stunned. You sent submarines during the crisis? The Russians nod. With nuclear torpedoes. The room goes silent. Nuclear torpedoes. Nobody knew. For 40 years, nobody knew. The American admirals are pale. We were dropping depth charges on nuclear-armed submarines. The Russians confirm it. You were. The Americans didn't know. Your crews thought you were trying to sink them. Commander Vadim Orlov, who was aboard B-59, confirms the details. They describe the vote. Savitsky wanted to launch. Maslenikov agreed. Arkhipov refused. 2-1. The launch didn't happen. If it had... Orlov doesn't finish the sentence. Everyone in the room understands. If it had, most of them wouldn't be alive to have this conversation. Thomas Blanton, director of the National Security Archive, processes what he's hearing. He turns to the Russian delegation, this man, Arkhipov. Where is he now? Dead, they tell him. 1998, cancer. Blanton absorbs this, then says something that will become famous. The man who saved the world, and nobody knows his name. The story explodes. Journalists worldwide pick it up. Publications run features, how close we came, how one man's vote prevented nuclear war, how we didn't know for 40 years. Historians revisit Cuban Missile Crisis through new lens. Not just Kennedy and Khrushchev, not just ICBMs and diplomacy, but submarines, underwater, cut off from communication, making decisions that could end civilization. Robert McNamara, Secretary of Defense during the crisis, is still alive in 2002. He's asked about the revelation. His response is haunting. We came very, very close, closer than we knew at the time. Historian Arthur M. Schlesinger, Jr., advisor to President Kennedy, adds, "This was not only the most dangerous moment of the Cold War, it was the most dangerous moment in human history. The Russians are asked why they kept it secret for 40 years. Several reasons: embarrassment, security concerns, not wanting to admit how close they came to unauthorized nuclear launch. But also, they didn't think it mattered. The crisis ended. War didn't happen. Why dwell on what-ifs? They didn't realize that what if is the most important question, because the answer is billions dead, civilization destroyed, and one man prevented it." Archipov's widow, Olga, is contacted. Journalists, historians, documentary filmmakers, all wanting to know about her husband. She tells them what she knows, how humble he was, how he never spoke about it publicly, how he believed he just did his duty, nothing special, just following protocol, analyzing the situation, making the rational choice. But it was special. Maintaining rationality in hell is special. Saying no when two other officers say yes is special. Preventing nuclear war when you're exhausted, terrified, and underwater with no information is special. Olga becomes her husband's advocate, telling his story, making sure people know his name. Vasili Alexandrovich Arkhipov, the man who saved the world. The Future of Life. Institute creates an award, Future of Life Award, given to individuals who, through extraordinary measures, often performed despite personal risk and without obvious reward, safeguard the collective future of humanity. The first recipient, Vasili Arkhipov, posthumous. His family accepts on his behalf, his daughters, his grandchildren. They're proud but also sad. He never knew, never got to see the recognition. Died believing his career was good but unremarkable. PBS creates a documentary, Secrets of the Dead, The Man Who Saved the World. Aired October 23, 2012. 50th anniversary of the crisis. The documentary interviews survivors, shows declassified footage, explains exactly how close we came, how one vote separated survival from annihilation. The film is watched by millions. Archipov's name becomes known, not as famous as Kennedy or Khrushchev, but known, remembered, honored. Schools start teaching it. Cuban Missile Crisis Unit includes B-59, includes Archipov's vote. Students learn about nuclear deterrence, brinkmanship, and the importance of individual decision-making in crisis. Some students write essays. What would I have done in Archipov's position? Most admit they don't know. The pressure is unimaginable. Two colleagues voting yes, explosions all around, exhaustion, fear, duty to crew. How do you say no to all that? But Arkhipov did. He said no, and 3 billion people who would have died in nuclear war got to live instead. Got to have children. Those children had children. We're talking about entire family trees that exist only because Vasili Arkhipov refused to sign a launch order on October 27, 1962. Here's the terrifying part. This almost happened again, multiple times. 1983, Soviet officer Stanislav Petrov in command bunker. Early warning system reports American nuclear launch, 5 missiles inbound. Protocol says report to superiors. Launch response. Petrov suspects malfunction, waits. Turns out to be satellite error, false alarm, no American launch. If Petrov followed procedure, he triggers Soviet counterstrike. Nuclear war Norwegian research rocket launched to study Aurora Borealis. Looks like ICBM on Russian radar. Russian nuclear forces on high alert. President Yeltsin gets nuclear briefcase. Minutes to decide. Turns out to be weather rocket. Norway notified Russia beforehand. Message didn't reach the right people. Another near miss. How many times have we almost died without knowing? How many times has civilization been saved by one person saying, "Wait, let's verify, let's not assume the worst"? We don't know. Most incidents stay classified. We find out decades later. If we find out at all, the nuclear arsenals still exist, thousands of warheads, ready to launch, controlled by human beings, fallible, exhausted, operating on incomplete information, making decisions in minutes that will affect billions. We trust that those people will be like Arkhipov, calm in crisis, rational under pressure, willing to say no when everyone else says yes, but we can't guarantee it. We got lucky in 1962, we got lucky in 1983, we got lucky in 1995. How long does luck last? Archipov's story isn't just history, it's warning. We built weapons capable of ending civilization. We put them in the hands of human beings. We created situations where one person's decision determines whether billions live or die. And we did this on purpose, by design, because deterrence requires the threat, and the threat requires the ability, and the ability requires humans ready to use it, and humans make mistakes. October 27th, 1962. Vasili Arkhipov made the right decision. But he almost didn't. The vote was 2-1. If there had been only 2 officers on B-59, nuclear launch happens. If Arkhipov had been on a different submarine that day, nuclear launch happens. If he'd been sick or injured or killed in the K-19 accident the year before, nuclear launch happens. We're alive because of bureaucracy, because someone decided brigade chiefs of staff needed to authorize submarine nuclear launches, because of a detail so minor it almost didn't matter. That's how close we came. That's how fragile survival is when weapons exist that can kill billions. One vote, one man, one decision. Between you reading this and never existing at all, walk up to random people on the street, ask them who saved the world from nuclear war. They'll guess. Kennedy? Khrushchev? Maybe Gorbachev? They won't say Vasili Arkhipov, because they've never heard the name. He's not in most history textbooks, not on the test, not part of the standard Cuban Missile Crisis narrative. He's a footnote, if that. But he's the most important person of October 27, 1962. More important than presidents or premiers, because presidents and premiers were negotiating on the surface while Arkhipov was preventing war underwater. They were trying to avoid catastrophe, while Arkhipov was directly stopping it. They were talking while he was deciding. One vote, no. His grave is in Moscow. Visits are rare. No monument, no memorial, just a name on a headstone. Vasili Alexandrovich Arkhipov, 1926-1998, the man who saved the world from nuclear war. Except the headstone doesn't say that. Just his name, his dates, his rank, Vice Admiral. Nothing about B-59, nothing about October 27th, nothing about preventing nuclear launch. Because even his headstone doesn't tell his story. Most people alive today owe their lives to him. If you were born after 1962, you exist because Arkhipov said no. Your parents met and had you because Arkhipov said no. Your grandparents survived to have your parents because Arkhipov said no. Your children exist because Arkhipov said no. Your friends, your co-workers, your neighbors, everyone under 62 years old. We're all here because one Soviet submarine officer refused to launch a nuclear weapon when 2 of his colleagues voted yes. And almost nobody knows his name. That's the tragedy. Not that he died. Everyone dies. Not that he got radiation poisoning from K-19, occupational hazard. The tragedy is that he died believing his career was good but unremarkable. that his decision didn't matter. That history was made by others while he just did his duty. He never knew that historians would call him the man who saved the world. Never knew that his decision was the most important of the entire Cold War. Never knew that billions owe him their lives. Olga, his widow, said something beautiful after the story came out. He was the most ordinary person. He didn't want to be a hero. He just wanted to do the right thing. That's what makes it remarkable. He wasn't trying to save the world. He was trying to verify information before making a catastrophic decision. He was being rational when everyone else panicked. He was doing his job when his job required saying no to his superiors. And in doing his job correctly, he prevented the deaths of billions. Remember his name, Vasili Arkhipov, the man who said no, the vote that mattered, the officer who kept his head when everyone else was losing theirs. The reason you're alive to read this. October 27th, 1962. The day the world almost ended. The day one man stopped it. The day you've never heard about. The name you've never known. Until now.